We have this idea baked into our culture that complexity is the ultimate sign of intelligence, right? We think using big words, building these super intricate systems, or just cramming more and more features into something, that's what makes us smart. But what if that's all completely backward? Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea that the true peak of intelligence, the real mark of genius, isn't about adding more. It's about knowing what to take away.
And to kick things off, I want to tell you a story. It's something straight out of a spy thriller, set right at the height of the Cold War. It's a mystery that totally flipped everything the West thought it knew about technology, power, and what it even means to be intelligent. Okay, so picture this. The year is 1970. The world is on a knife's edge, completely divided. And high above the Soviet Union, American spy satellites are making their silent passes. When they spot something new, a shadow moving at speeds that just seem impossible. It's a fighter jet, but it's bigger and way, way faster than anything the US had. They managed to clock this thing, this phantom jet they codenamed the Foxbat, at Mach 3. We're talking 3 times the speed of sound. It was literally faster than a speeding bullet. And back at the Pentagon, they went into a full-blown panic. I mean, the assumption was immediate. This machine had to be a technological marvel, built with futuristic materials and computers decades ahead of their own. For 6 long years, the West lived in absolute fear of the Foxbat. But then, in 1976, the whole story changed. A Soviet pilot, Viktor Belenko, defected. He flew his MiG-25 Foxbat and landed it in Japan. And just like that, the CIA had their hands on the monster. They took it apart, piece by piece, expecting to find the technology of the future. But what they found was the technology of the past. The plane wasn't made of some advanced titanium alloy. It was heavy steel, with these crude, obvious hand-welded seams. And the super advanced avionics? There were no microchips. They were running on vacuum tubes, technology the US had considered totally obsolete for 20 years. At first, you can imagine the American engineers just laughed. They called it a flying brick, a piece of junk. But then, pretty quickly, the laughter stopped, because they started to realize that this so-called primitive design was actually an act of absolute genius. See, vacuum tubes don't freeze up in the freezing cold of the stratosphere. They're tough as nails, built to survive hard landings on rough, unpaved runways. And here's the kicker. They are completely immune to an electromagnetic pulse, the EMP from a nuclear explosion. So think about that. If World War III had actually happened, all those sophisticated American jets with their delicate microchips would have been fried in an instant. The primitive Soviet plane, it would have been the only thing left flying. And that really brings us to the core question of this whole explainer. How could something so simple, so seemingly backward, be so much more effective? You see, the Americans had built a fragile Ferrari, a masterpiece designed for perfect conditions. The Soviets, they had built a hammer. It was designed to work no matter what. Their design wasn't less advanced, it was just laser-focused on solving the right problem. So, if simplicity is that powerful, why do we do the opposite? Why do we constantly overcomplicate things in our jobs and the way we talk to each other, even in our own thinking? Well, it turns out there's a really deep psychological reason for it. It's a kind of cognitive trap that hits experts the hardest. It's called the curse of knowledge. And here's how it works. The moment you truly become an expert in something, your brain actually rewires itself a bit. You completely forget what it felt like to be a beginner. You can't imagine not knowing what you now know. So you start using jargon and acronyms and all this shorthand, just assuming everyone else has the same context you do. You're not trying to be confusing, but you've lost the ability to see your topic from an outsider's perspective. And a lot of the time, complexity becomes this mask we wear to hide the fact that maybe we don't understand something as well as we pretend to. You can see this exact same principle, this idea of finding the essence by removing all the extra stuff, in the world of art. Back in 1945, Pablo Picasso started this series of prints called The Bull. Now, the first one, Plate 1, is a masterpiece of realism. I mean, you can see every single muscle, every strand of hair. It's technically flawless. But Picasso wasn't happy. He felt that all that detail was actually hiding the truth of the bull. So over the next 10 prints, he began to subtract. He stripped away this shading, then the texture. He removed entire body parts. He just kept taking things away until he was left with Plate 11. It's just a dozen simple lines, but it is unmistakably, powerfully a bull. He didn't find its essence by adding more. He found it by taking everything else away. And this really gets to the paradox at the heart of it all, doesn't it? We're all taught that building something complicated shows how much effort and intelligence we have. But the real work, the true mark of genius, is in the act of simplification. It's that relentless pursuit of the essential core, just like Picasso and his bull. And listen, this isn't just a neat idea for artists or Soviet engineers. Some of the greatest minds in history understood that the only path to real understanding and lasting impact is through radical simplicity. So let's look at a few of these masters of the craft. The French mathematician Blaise Pascal wrote this in a letter centuries ago, and it just perfectly captures the struggle. I mean, let that sink in for a second. He said he didn't have the time to make the letter shorter. Brevity takes time. Simplicity is expensive. It demands deep thinking and ruthless editing, and the guts to remove things that are merely good in the pursuit of what is absolutely essential. This same idea was a core principle for the brilliant physicist Richard Feynman. And he wasn't just a Nobel Prize winner. The guy was a master communicator. He had this personal rule that was this incredible check on his own ego and his own understanding. He figured if he couldn't explain a complex idea to a first-year student, he didn't blame the student for not getting it. He blamed himself for not understanding it well enough to make it simple. For Feynman, true mastery meant you could explain it in plain, simple language. He actually formalized this into a method we now call the Feynman technique. It's a really simple 4-step process for learning anything deeply. First, you pick a concept. Second, you pretend to teach it to a child using only simple words. Third, and this is the magic step, you identify all the spots where you get stuck or where you have to use jargon. That's where your own understanding is weak. Finally, you go back to the source material, review, and simplify your explanation until it's flawless. It's a tool that forces you to turn confusing data into real knowledge. It's the ultimate test, really. A mediocre mind makes simple things sound complicated, but a great mind makes complicated things sound simple. Let's look at a more modern example. Before 2007, the smartphone market was just a sea of complexity. BlackBerrys were king, with their little keyboards with 30-plus physical buttons. Then, Steve Jobs gets up on stage and does the unthinkable. He took what everyone considered the most essential feature of a smartphone, the keyboard, and he got rid of it. His engineers thought he was nuts. But Jobs understood something crucial. The keyboard wasn't the point. The content on the screen was the point. The physical buttons were just an obstacle in the way. By removing them, he didn't make the phone dumber. He made it infinitely more powerful and adaptable. He simplified the hardware to unleash the complexity of the software. Okay, so we've seen the Foxbat, Picasso, Feynman, Steve Jobs. They're all pointing to the exact same truth. The most powerful path to improvement often isn't addition, it's subtraction. So the real question is, how do we take this really profound idea and actually apply it to our own lives? Well, there's a formal name for this philosophy, and it comes from ancient theology, of all places. It's called via negativa, which just means the negative way. It's the art of defining something by what it is not. And in modern life, it's the practice of getting better in your health, your wealth, your wisdom, by removing what is harmful instead of just adding what you think is helpful. It's about doing fewer things wrong. Now, this requires a fundamental shift in how you think. Our default setting as humans is to add, right? My diet isn't working, I'll add a new supplement. My business is struggling, let's add a new feature. We are conditioned to believe that more is always better. Via negativa forces you to ask a totally different and frankly more powerful question. What can I remove to make this better? What here is non-essential? What is just getting in the way? And this leads you to some really tough but clarifying questions for yourself. Take a hard look at your investments. Are you holding 50 different stocks because you're actually diversified? Or just because you haven't done the hard work of figuring out which 5 are truly great? Or look at your schedule. Is it packed because you're being productive? Or because you're just busy? Because you haven't learned to say no? See, this isn't about doing less for the sake of it. It's about focusing all your energy on what actually matters. The legendary jazz musician Charles Mingus put it perfectly. He said anyone can make something simple sound complicated. That's commonplace, that's easy. But making something complicated simple, awesomely simple, now that's creativity. That's the real art. Look, we're living in an age of just insane, unprecedented complexity. We are drowning in data, in notifications, in constant noise. And in this new environment, the person who can cut through all that chaos, the person who can find the simple underlying truth and communicate it clearly, that is the person who is going to own the future. Simplicity isn't just an aesthetic choice anymore, it is a massive strategic advantage. So what's the one thing to take away from all this?
The goal isn't to be afraid of complexity. It's to be afraid of being unnecessary. The path forward, the path to genius, isn't always about what you can build, or what you can create, or what you can add. Sometimes the most powerful, the most intelligent, and the most creative thing you can possibly do is subtract.